Well, hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to join you again for the next installment of the University of Dundee Law School mooting training and begin preparation for our much anticipated internals competition. So it's great to welcome back Libby and to be joined by Kelsey and Scarlett, who will be doing the training this afternoon. So we have got two sessions lined up before the competition begins on the week starting the 21st of February. That'll be the week for almost all schools, unless you've notified us otherwise. And we've got two sessions lined up. The first session, we're going to be giving you expert advice and insights, how to present the case for the appellant. And then next week, we are going to be doing the same for the position of the respondent. So that will give you all the insights you need for you then to go off and do your own research, your own preparation, so you're fully prepared for the internals competitions. So thanks very much to all the schools who got back in touch and told us the number of students who are going to be involved, the number of teams, and indeed your preferred times for the internals competition. If you've not provided us with that information, please do contact Libby and pass that on to her. Libby, unfortunately, was off for a couple of weeks, but now she's back and it's great to have her. So pass that information on to Libby, and then we'll begin very shortly the process of scheduling the internals competitions for your schools. So we need teams of 4 people. So you could just have one team, or you could have 2, 3. I think one school even has 4 teams. And so the teams will play off against each other. And we have been asked what sort of format the competition is going to take. And it's very clear, each participant, so lead counsel, junior counsel, each will speak for 7 minutes. So we will have 28 minutes of speaking. Within your 7 minutes, the judge, whether it is Kelsey or Scarlett, or if you're lucky, could be me, will be asking you some questions. That's not extra time, that is time within the allotted 7 minutes. And remember, this is not done to sort of catch you out, but really to replicate the normal experience of what life is like in court when judges do stop to ask for clarification. They might ask for extra information, or they seek to test you on a specific point. We won't be really trying we're not trying to be mean to you, but we do want to assess how much you really have mastered the issues that you're talking about. And also keep it a bit of advice. I know that Kelsey and Scarlett are going to be emphasizing it. Although you've got the chance, especially doing this online, to have all the information in front of you, do take care not just to read. If you remember back to the fantastic video that Scarlett, Kelsey, Rory and Louise did back before Christmas, we had the exemplar best practice. And then in particular, we had Scarlett's performance of how not to do a moot, where she sort of ended up hiding behind her piece of paper and talking so tremendously quickly. And I know that it's often very easy to get nervous when you're doing a moot, and it's a temptation to try and deliver all the information, especially if you've been asked a question, but don't fall into that trap of speaking far too quickly. Remember, you're trying to convince the judge of your position, so it's really important to take time to stop, to emphasize different parts. And that requires you to modulate your tone and equally to modulate your pace so that the judge really knows the points that you seek to emphasize. Okay. So we're super excited about the internals competition. Be great practice for when it comes to the international competition. If a school has more than one team, we'll be deciding which is the best team, and then that team will go on to represent your school in the international competition in April. So let me pause there. I will now pass on to Libby, who's got some housekeeping to flag up as well, and then we'll hear from Kelsey and Scarlett.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor McAlevey, and it's great to be back. So and lovely to be seeing everybody here today. Fantastic. I think Professor McAlevey has covered pretty much all of the housekeeping that I was going to cover on the actual competition itself. Just to reinforce that we really need to get timings from you guys for the competition week so that we can start to schedule those competitions in. And don't worry, if you've only got one team, that's fine. We will try and work it so that you are in competition with another school from the same country. So don't worry too much about that. Also, just a quick point to say that if you have an even number of teams, then obviously you will have, we'd like you to work it out yourselves who is appellants and who are respondents. But if you just have one team, then we will probably give you a little bit of a nudge on that one, a little bit of a hand to decide. You should be preparing really both sides of the arguments anyway, so that you are aware of everything. So that will give you good preparation for the competition itself. And remember that this is an internals competition. It is practice for you. So this is an opportunity for you to learn a lot and for you to gain a little bit of confidence in yourselves as well. So if you could check with your teachers, if you haven't already done so, that they have got back to me, and please encourage them to get back to me as soon as possible with times. That would be much appreciated. About today, we are running this as a webinar, so we have a Q&A section. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A as we go, and we will either answer questions via type or we will verbalize those questions as we go. There is also the chat function if you can't find the Q&A, but it's quite difficult for us to man both at the same time. So we would prefer for you to use the Q&A if at all possible. And I think apart from that, is there anything else that anyone can think of? I don't think so. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Kelsey and Scarlett to take you through the session today.
Hi, everyone. I hope you had a lovely little break. Away. We're back and we're going to be talking about the appellants like Libby and Peter said. So we'll just go through a quick refresher of the facts because I know it's been a while since you might have seen them, and then we will have a look at the grounds of appeal. So go on. So the appellants will speak first, or the first appellant will speak first, and they will introduce the judge to everyone who's there, all the counsel. So this doesn't only mean introducing yourself, it means introducing your opposition and your team member as well. Something's important is when you're introducing yourself, is to give yourself a title. So I would say I am Miss Scarlett Wilson. And to do that for everyone. And when you're referring to your opposition, you would say, we've mentioned this before, but you say, my learned friends across the bar, if you remember. So that's just the very start of the introduction for the appellants. The first appellant will also introduce the grounds that will be argued. Try not to ramble on too long for introducing the grounds. Make sure the judge gets an overview, but don't waste your time with it because it's better to just get into actually arguing it. The judge might want to hear the facts of the moot you're arguing. They might have read it the night before, might have need a refresher. They might not have read it at all. So make sure you offer the facts to them, and that gives you a chance as well to set up your arguments because you're setting out the facts as you see them or as the appellant sees them. And this is a really important point. The moot problem does contain all the information you'll need, but you have to be able to pick out what information is useful and summarize it for the judge, and what information you're going to rely on and summarize that for the judge.
I think the first appellant speaker always has the hardest role in a moot because they're the first to speak to the judge. So obviously the first appellant speaker won't know what the judge is going to be like, what type of questions I want. But my advice is always to just speak slowly and to speak clearly and take your time and make sure that you are calm. If you go too fast or get really nervous and speed up, the judge won't be able to understand your argument that well. So if you're the first appellant speaker, really try and set the tone. So make sure you're clear and slow and confident through your submission.
Yeah, I would say slower is always better. If in doubt, just go slower. But yeah, you have to set up, as the first appellant, you have to set up almost the entire case. So it is a big job, but if it's done right, it can really help swing the case either way.
So I'll just give you a quick refresher of the facts of the case. These aren't all of it. This is an example of how you might summarize the facts when you give them to the judge. Obviously, if you're appellant or if you're respondent, you'll pick out and try and emphasize different facts. So if you're the appellant, you'd really want to try and emphasize the interference that Mr. Ardberg's actions had to the Jamesons. So Susan and John Jameson lived in their father's house, and their parents lived in Saudi Arabia and only returned at Christmas. Edward Ardberg moved into the house next door. He is a member of a pagan cult that worships the sun. He meets with 10 others in his garden at sunrise, and they have a 30-minute service that consists of chanting and letting off fireworks. The Jamesons complain that this interrupts their sleep. They commence proceedings against Mr. Ardberg for nuisance and sought an injunction to stop their activity. So that's just a refresher, because I know we looked at the moot problem last just before Christmas. So a lot of you might not remember exactly what it's about. So I would recommend going and having a look at it again. There are some other facts we left out here, but you might want to emphasize them as the appellant, such as that the Jamesons, I think, went and spoke to Mr. Ardberg and did ask him repeatedly to stop. So that might be something you want to emphasize to the judge, just to put forward the argument that Mr. Ardberg isn't being reasonable. So you can see how kind of certain facts work in your favor and perhaps other ones don't.
So the grounds of appeal. So at first instance, the judge found that it's necessary to have a proprietary interest in the property in order to found a claim in nuisance. And the appellants will argue that the judge at first instance was mistaken in finding that. Just a quick refresher. First instance means the court where the case was first held. And if you say Judge Hazelburn erred, it means that he made a mistake. And then that's the first ground of appeal. So the appellants will be submitting that it is not actually necessary to have a proprietary interest in the property in order to found a claim in nuisance. The second ground of appeal is that the judge at first instance erred in finding that neither chanting nor letting off fireworks constituted an act of nuisance. Again, so the appellants will submit that chanting and letting off fireworks are sufficient to constitute an act of nuisance. And the final ground of appeal is that the judge erred in law in finding that Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights applies in circumstances where Mr. Ardberg's actions were not required, but simply motivated by this religious belief. So that final one is about Mr. Ardberg's freedom of expression and his right to express his religion. And the appellants are arguing that because Mr. Ardberg was not actually required to chant and let off fireworks by his religion, but simply that's why he did it, that the Article 9 shouldn't apply. So in some ways, the appellant's side can be easier because you've got your grounds of appeal given to you. But that doesn't mean it's easy by any stretch of the imagination. But you've got your grounds of appeal given to you, and you just have to go through each one and make sure you understand and kind of back up each point with an authority, hopefully.
And it's up to you as well because it's 3 grounds of appeal, but only 2 speakers, it's up to you to decide how you're going to split the grounds of appeal to make sure that you both speak for the allotted 7 minutes. Because if you give, say, the junior the first 2 grounds, the junior will, the first appellant speaker, they'll have to introduce the court, which could take 1 to 2 minutes. Then they'll have to cover 2 big grounds of appeal. And then that leaves only the second appellant speaker with 1 ground of appeal. So just try and think carefully about how you're going to do that to make sure that you can use all your 7 minutes effectively. Yeah, we can. So there's a question came about where would the recording of this presentation be posted? It will be posted on YouTube, and we'll circulate the link and the PowerPoints straight after. But yeah, keep coming up with questions. Obviously, this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions you have, and we will answer them.
This and next week will probably be the only times, am I right in saying that you'll see before the internals?
Yeah, but feel free to, if you're watching this as a recording, feel free to
contact us.
Yeah, contact us, email us, just to make sure that we can answer your questions beforehand.
yeah, those are the grounds of appeal. And like I say, you're given them, so you can just build off of what you're given. So distributing the workload, it obviously each team has a different number of people in. I know there are some teams that maybe have 5, whereas some have 4. So you really have to think about how you're distributing the work that you're doing and your research into each ground of appeal. So there are 3 grounds of appeal. You can, work out how to do research into each of them and split it up. But what I would say is that each competitor should have say I was only addressing the first ground of appeal, I should know the argument, even if it's not like perfect. I should know the argument for ground of appeal 2 and 3 in case I'm asked a question on it. And it's just good practice to make sure you know what your teammates or teammate will be saying. You don't need to know it intimately or as intimately as them, but make sure you know what their argument is. But like I say, do distribute the workload as suits and make sure that it's as even as can be. I know that some teams have team assistants to help with research. Make sure you utilize them, because that's really helpful to have people to help with research. And
obviously only 2 people are going to be able to speak in the moot. So try and make sure that everyone gets something from this experience, even if it's only writing the submissions or researching the cases, or even practicing mock moots amongst yourselves if you give them a go at speaking it. Obviously it's up to you to decide, but make sure that one person isn't doing all the work, because that's not fair. So we really want to try and emphasize teamwork here, because when you get to law school, if you want to go to law school, and if you want to continue mooting, you're going to have to rely on your partner and your team all the time.
And like we said, this is a practice round. The internals is a practice. So make sure everyone, like Kelsey just said, everyone gets something out of this experience, and the workload is distributed so that everyone can give like their best to it. For the team. Teamwork becomes so important mooting at law school.
So how to argue the grounds of appeal. So at the beginning of your submission, you will introduce the grounds. You will say, I'm going to argue this, and then state what this ground of appeal is, and I'm going to argue this and this, or say which one your partner is going to cover, just so it's clear to the judge what you'll be speaking about and what they'll be speaking about, so he or she knows when and who to ask certain questions to. So you can introduce your grounds by saying, it is submitted by the appellant that Judge Hazelburn erred in finding that it is necessary to have a proprietary interest in property in order to found a claim in nuisance. We don't like to use first person pronouns in mooting. You always want to say it is submitted, or the appellant submits, something along those lines. You really want to get into the role of being a solicitor or a barrister rather than being just a person.
We've spoken about this, I think, before as well, but you try and avoid words like believe, like we believe, or I believe, or I think, because it's the judge isn't necessarily interested in your thoughts. They want to know your legal arguments. So if you can, I know it's hard in the moment, especially if you're asked a question, but stick to it is submitted by the appellant, or the appellant submits, just to keep it more professional and formal.
Yeah. And then after you've introduced your ground, you then want to support it with a legal authority. Now, this could either be case law, or which is cases that go through the court, or legislation which has been passed by Parliament. Sometimes even it's a secondary source, so it could be like a law commission report. These are people that like suggest changes to the law, or even an article. However, we've circulated cases, and the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, for you to look at. So these will be the authorities that you'll be using. Every ground that you submit needs to have an authority, because the judge needs to know why he should apply it to the current case, and it needs to come from an area where there is law, basically. So something you say and argue could be completely correct, but unless it's supported by a legal authority, the judge won't want to listen to it, which is just the way it is. And then you want to explain how it applies to the present case. So be logical about the facts and legal principles of the cases you're using. Make sure you understand what it's going to bring to your argument, what point it's going to prove.
And also, if you find a case that you think this fits really well, just double check that the facts, there's not something really damning that completely undermines it. Make sure you know the facts of the case, where you have them somewhere you can access them, and the legal principles as well.
So here is just an example that I'll read through. This is, hold on, we've got a question. Do we have to prepare a skeleton argument? No, we're not asking for a skeleton argument in the internals competition. I'm not entirely sure on the official one, but you have a skeleton argument to look at, and it can be useful for you if you say we're writing a moot plan, like you're planning your submission. It will be helpful for you to write like a draft skeleton in terms of, this is the ground, these are the legal principles I'm applying, this is my legal authority. So yeah, it would be useful in that sense.
Someone's asked if there's one really good or really well-established student in a team being judged alongside a teammate that perhaps isn't as good. I don't know as far as putting teams through. I don't know what will happen there, but usually in moots, the criteria you're marked on, you're all marked individually, and then there's a combined score. But let us double check this, and then we'll get back to you. But the main thing at the minute for everyone to worry about is just doing their very best with it and working as a team. Teamwork is so important. So if you feel like a member of your team is slacking, or you feel like you're taking on too much work, speak to them, speak to your teacher, and try and redistribute the workload.
Yeah, if you're, I've just checked the marking scheme. So the marking scheme marks the individuals separately, but then you get an overall combined team score. And I'm not sure, I guess it depends if you're maybe the only team from your school. But if there's maybe other teams within your school, then it might be worth changing the competitors. I'm not sure. Obviously you want to put forward the best person and people you can to compete. But at the end of the day, like, someone could be really bad in the internals competition and then really improve for, I don't know, the international one. Like, we've seen it happen. And sometimes all it takes is one move and
people settle into it.
Yeah. So don't be worried if you're nervous or you think you came off bad in the internals one. Do you know what I mean?
I would also just recommend like concentrating on the moot itself. Don't worry too much about what's going to happen after, and as far as results and things like that, just concentrate on doing your absolute best and making sure your team does its absolute best. Instead, and try not to worry too much about what will happen after, because we'll sort all that when the time comes.
Yeah, so I'll just read through this example now. This would kind of be like how you would give your moot. So you would say, it is submitted that Judge Hazelburn erred in finding that it is necessary to have a proprietary interest in property in order to found a claim in nuisance. This is submitted on the authority of Korzajan and Bush, which was heard in 1993 and reported in issue 3 of the Weekly Law Report, beginning at page 476. My lord, I believe the facts to be relevant, and I will provide a brief summary. And then you would provide a brief summary. And then you would quote the legal principle, which in this instance was from Lord Justice Dillon, where he stated that, to my mind, it is ridiculous if in this present age, the law is that the making of deliberately harassing and pestering phone calls to a person is only actionable in the civil court if the recipient of the calls happens to have the freehold or a leasehold proprietary interest in the premises in which he or she has received the calls. While this case has been overruled by a more recent case, it is submitted that your lordship should recognise that the law currently is too restrictive and provides no remedy to the appellants, even though they are the sole users of the property, and that the respondents' actions are reducing their enjoyment of the property. So that's how you kind of use a case and apply it to the current case at hand and kind of show that the law maybe needs to catch up a little bit. You basically want to put your argument forward, and this quote, because we circulated the judgments, you can find these quotes within the judgment. I think I just like searched proprietary interest within it and found it. So you should be able to do that. If you're struggling for quotes, obviously you can just use the legal principle. I think we've also put around summaries of the cases along with some key quotes. So if you have those, obviously find a quote that you like.
This is a really good example as well, because it's being acknowledged that this has been overruled by a more recent case. So if this part hadn't been written, the judge would probably ask, well, hasn't this been overruled? But this is already built into the argument. It's already built in about why they're using it, despite it being overruled. I think if you're wanting to use a case that is maybe outdated, then that's no problem, as long as you can say why it's relevant and why it should be applied. You must always refer to them as my lord or my lady, or your lordship or ladyship. So if I were to refer the judge to something, I would say, if I could refer your lordship to this case, but if I was going to talk directly to the judge, I would say, my lady, the appellant submit that, whatever. So yeah, you have to keep that, and that's a really big part of etiquette, is to keep that title for the judge the entire time.
Yeah, you can kind of see in this example where both my lord and then your lordship are used. So just try and use that as a guide as to when to say it. If you get it wrong, then it's not the end of the world. And all you're wanting to do with my lord and your lordship is trying to remain formal to the judge. Don't call them judge. Don't call them your majesty. I can't think of any of the others.
Try as well to avoid my lordship. It's either my lord or your lordship. My lordship, it's not grammatically correct. Again, it's not the end of the world if you do, and this is a practice round, but submissions tend to seem a lot cleaner if the etiquette is correct.
So I'll move on from that example.
So like we just talked about with the final part of the last example, the last slide, if your submission is going really well, the judge might want to test you on your argument. This is usually a good sign. Like Peter mentioned earlier, the judge isn't trying to scare you, not trying to be mean to you, usually. They just want to see if you know your argument as well as you seem like you do. So a good example is the example we just used, where the case had been overruled. The judge might press you on that and ask, well, why should they consider that, despite it not being the most up-to-date, the most modern? In that scenario, you just want to make sure that you're remaining calm. Like I say, the judge isn't trying to be mean or catch you out. Take a sip of water if you need a minute, but you just make sure you know why you're using each case, why you're referring to the principles, and if the facts are similar, if you're telling the court it needs to modernize itself, it needs to bring itself up to date. You have to be able to justify why you've used a case. If you're asked a question by the judge, please do not panic. And if you don't understand what they've said, you can ask them to repeat the question or even rephrase the question. Try and give an answer a go, though, if you are struggling. Don't say, I'm not sure, or I don't know. Try and just give it a go, or bring it back to what you've just been saying.
A lot of times if the judge asks you a lot of questions or is kind of pushing you on a point, it's because they like what you're saying and they think it's interesting and they just want you to expand a little bit.
And I think if I can just chip in, I think this is definitely something you can practice in your training for the moot, that when you're giving your presentation in front of your other teammates, one other teammate should be charged with deliberately asking questions, and maybe even quite hard questions, just so you can get practice for taking that deep breath, taking that sip of water, as Scarlett has mentioned, and then give your answer, and have the reflex not to go, oh, I didn't think of that, and panic, not to do that, but to just take a second, try and come up with a coherent answer. And sometimes you won't know the answer, but try and think of something reasonably relevant to say. So think back to the video and look at how each of our mooters managed to answer questions. And I was quite probing in some of the questions. I remember Kelsey sort of had a great sort of response, took a deep breath and then responded to me. So this is all about practice. Think about, if you watch the news in your home country, very often politicians will be asked challenging questions, and you can see the politicians who've been trained how to deal with difficult questions. It's all about practice. So just do this in advance of the internals competition, then you'll have live practice with a bit more pressure, and that'll put you in an even better position when it comes to the international competition itself.
And just to tie into that, there's generally a few questions you can predict are going to come up, or a few key issues where maybe you've not got the best side of the law, or your answer's a bit wibbly. Maybe you think, I've not explained that clearly enough, they're probably going to want more information. So just try and anticipate that and try and think, it's worthwhile you doing a moot amongst your team, and then the team going, well, I didn't quite understand that bit, or that bit seemed a bit underdeveloped, or you went on about that for way too long. And then you can sort of anticipate the questions that'll come up and just prepare a few sentences. And I like to write down what are the main points I'm trying to make for the moot, and always try most questions that you get asked back to at least one of them. So don't let the judge take you somewhere you don't want to go, and somewhere that's completely off your submission. Always try and link it back to what you've argued and what you've submitted.
Someone's asked in the chat, it's a little bit off topic before we move on, that about studying law in Scotland. So at Dundee we have a English law course, and that's actually what I'm doing. It's only 3 years. You can do Scots law here as well, but we do English law here as well.
Yes, I was going to chip in there and see if Professor McAlevey wanted to say a little bit more about that, perhaps. But yes, Scots law does differ from English law. English law is based on common law, and that is the degree that most international students come and study with us, is the English law degree. But we do offer Scots law as well, and we do offer a dual qualifying degree as well. So Peter, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Yeah. So sorry, I can't actually see the questions right now. Could you just read it out to me again?
It's just, if someone studies law in Scotland, is it Scottish law that the person would be taught? I heard Scottish law is slightly different from that of England and Wales. Yeah, absolutely. So all the things you said are entirely correct. So Dundee is unusual in that we have the 3 streams. We have the Scots stream, we have the dual qualifying stream, where students start in Scots law and then go on to consider English law, and then we have the standard 3-year English LLB. So all of our students from Africa, with the odd exception, have all come to do the standard 3-year LLB, then with a view either to qualifying in England and Wales, or indeed to going back to their home jurisdiction and qualifying there. And every year we have students in particular from Nigeria who go back to the Nigerian Law School in Buwari, outside of Abuja, do the qualification there, and then begin their training contract. And you can do follow a similar pathway in Ghana and in Kenya as well. So it is the 3-year English degree that we do. We've always taught it from our inception, and even before Dundee became an independent institution in 1967, when Dundee was part of the University of St Andrews, and we taught law as part of St Andrews. So coming to us, you'll be coming to do a standard 3-year English law degree, but in the wonderful, beautiful surroundings of Scotland. It's a win-win situation. And whilst you're here, actually, there is another question about the international competition. So the competition that's going to be later on in the year, will that be online as well? Yes,
that will be online. Unfortunately, it'd be great to do it face to face. So when we first started doing the competitions, they were sort of country by country. So I went off to Kenya and did the competition. Then I went to Ghana. Then I went to Nigeria. Obviously, it's a great shame not to be able to do it face to face, but a consequence of moving online is that it's meant it's been so much easier and possible to make our competition truly Pan-African. And that means we brought together schools from across the continent, 5 countries involved, international competition, just as we did last April. And this time we're going to double in size, and we're super excited about looking forward to the competition in April.
Very much so. Right, back to you guys.
Thanks, Livy and Peter. So we've just got some pieces of terminology that we thought you might have forgotten about or would just like to be reacquainted with.
Kelsey and Scarlett,
oh, can you hear us? Hello? I think we're having audio issues. I can't hear Livy anymore.
Can anyone else hear us?
Please type in the chat. But can you hear us, Miriam?
Yes, now that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, I think we're fine again.
Yeah, please do let us know if you
We'll
can't
just
hear us.
quickly wrap this up. So obviously we've been over the grounds of appeal and the grounds of response and aired. To sue, I don't remember when that came in, but to sue just means to bring proceedings against an individual or legal entity. You've probably heard of suing before in all the TV shows, but it just means to bring proceedings in a court. Nuisance is a tort, so that's just a specific area of law where damage has been incurred, or
but it's not a criminal area of law.
Yeah. That's fine. So an injunction is a court order. So you would usually sue and then, or like bring proceedings to get a court order. And the court order in this instance is an injunction, which means it stops an individual from doing certain things.
So in this case, it would be stopping the, is his name Mr. Ardberg from chanting and letting off fireworks and singing.
And then a proprietary interest is a right in respect of property that you are the private owner of. So this would mean that you either owned the house or the piece of land or the building, or you leased it or rented it or something like that. So you have a right in it. To distinguish a case from a binding authority means to argue that the facts of the case were not similar enough for the ratio to be on point. So this seems a bit difficult, but in this instance for the appellants, you'd want to distinguish, I think it's the Canary Wharf case. And you'd say that while this case is the more binding authority and should technically be applied, in this instance, it doesn't seem fair given the specific circumstances of the case. So you want to make it clear that you recognize that it is a binding authority, but in this instance, it's not right to apply it.
There is a question. If you can't pronounce the name of the case, give it your best go, or ask for help before.
I'm guessing that they're thinking of the Khorasanjian case. So actually, Professor McAlevey, you might be able to help us. What is the correct pronunciation for that case?
Okay, well, I think Khorasanjian is how I've been pronouncing it, but I stand to be corrected by somebody who has greater insights than me.
Don't worry too much about that. So I don't think you'll be judged particularly harshly on mispronunciation. Give it a go. Give it your best shot. If you're not sure, ask your teacher. And we're quite happy to answer these kind of questions and try and give you a sort of a phonetic type spelling for you if you really feel that you need that.
And there's another question about, will we be required to have a bundle in the internal competition? We're not asking for a bundle. However, you have an example of one, which could be really helpful for you to look through. But we won't be asking for one for the internal competition, so don't worry about that.
There's some recommended reading on the slides now, that just to help with the problem. If there's any more questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. And if any come up, you can either give them to Louise and Rory next week for the respondent seminar, or feel free to ask your teacher to contact and email us.
There is also the WhatsApp group as well. So if you feel that the question is relevant for the whole audience and you feel brave enough, then please do put the question in there. We're all on that WhatsApp group, so we should be able to answer that relatively quickly as well. Lots of ways you can get in touch with us.
And there's just a question about what if only one law student in the school, would he/she be able to participate? So I'm not sure on the answer to this.
I imagine not. And sorry, I imagine the one student wouldn't be able to compete, which is unfortunate.
But you've still got all the material.
You've still got all the material. If you want to have a look at the problem, just familiarize yourself with the law. I think that'll be really helpful. Someone else has mentioned that their teacher has asked for a bundle. So for the internals competition, we won't require a bundle, but if your teacher would like one, then I recommend giving them one. But we won't require a bundle for the internals competition. You've got all the cases, you've got all the materials, so you can just pick out what you want from there.
And just remember, you should not be taking in any additional information. It is just material that you've been provided with that you use. Go to the summaries, understand what the cases are about. If you want to get additional quotes, then you can dip into the full text of the judgments. Any other questions?
I think there is one.
There is a question there just about emailing the account that sends out the Zoom links. That is responded to, but it's probably better if you send the emails directly to either myself or one of the students. I will put my email in the chat just now. In fact, I'll type, yeah, I will type it in the chat because everybody will see that. So I'll type my email in the chat. Please feel free to email me directly with any questions that you have. I think that's probably the best option for you guys.
Yes, so we're obviously done our presentation, but if you have any more questions, we'd be happy to answer them. And essentially next week, what we'll be doing is going over similar things, but this time
From the other side.
From the respondents. And we'll have Louise and Rory coming in and sharing all their wonderful knowledge.
Feel free you should all have the links to rewatch your own seminars from a few months ago. Feel free to refresh yourselves with them if you're struggling. And make sure you utilize your teammates.
Absolutely, so important. Well, Kelsey, Scarlett, thank you so much, and to Libby as well. It's been great to join you, those of you who came live and those of you who will be listening offline. So fantastic. Lots of hard work to do. We look forward to seeing you all again at the same time next week. So have a great week and happy preparation and mooting. See you soon.